You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, welcome back. I have a treat. Tom Skilling, Chicago's weather man emeritus. Look, before his well-earned retirement, Tom was the most respected and trusted meteorologist, not just in Chicago, but because WGN broadcast all over the country, Tom was well-known and beloved everywhere. He is serious and thoughtful about weather and climate, and he's been on a mission to teach all of us what we know to help save our planet. Tom, welcome back.
Oh, Edwin, that was so nice. I feel like Dana Carvey saying, I am not worthy. You know, I just, but what a nice, nice introduction.
Hey, Tom, the last couple of times you and I talked on the show, we talked about climate change. This time I want to narrow the focus just to talk about weather. Because you taught me that you said last time that, you know, in some ways it's easier to predict climate than weather because of its scale. And weather is more variable and it requires an incredible amount of very local data points in order to predict and sometimes even But now, look, I trust you a whole lot more than I trust Elon Musk to tell me what works in weather prediction. So what do you think are the consequences of, you know, they're gutting NOAA and the National Weather Service?
Oh, it's awful. It's just awful. You know, and the irony is, Edwin, it's occurring in an area which really is the birthplace of our modern weather forecasting system in this country. This dates back to the 1850s, and a researcher up in Milwaukee by the name of Dr. Increase Lapham, and he was concerned about, among other things, shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. And the Civil War intervened between his concern in the 50s and a letter he ultimately ended up writing to Congress in near 1870, and President Ulysses S. Grant ended up signing into law a bill that Congress put forth to start the Army Signal Corps taking weather observations in an organized fashion and issuing the first weather forecast. And you know something, Edwin? The first weather forecast issued in this country was for Chicago and for the waters offshore here back in 1870. So our weather service is an institution that's been around in one form or another since 1870. And what's going on right now with these budget cuts at NOAA and the National Weather Service, I mean, really threaten the integrity of the system. Do you realize, Edwin, in the course of a day, our National Weather Service collects 6.3 billion weather observations. In the course of a year, it will produce 1.5 million forecasts and 50,000 warnings of one form or another. These are essential. They're life-saving. And, you know, we've been at work on a television piece on these cuts. We've been talking to others about it, but in fact, I talked to a Tribune reporter just the other day. But this TV piece took us out to Washington, Illinois, which was a place where in 2013 in November, an EF4 tornado, that's a tornado with 190-mile-per-hour winds, literally leveled a section of that community just east of Peoria. It hit on a Sunday morning when people were sitting in church, and many of them got the tornado warning, which was issued 11 minutes ahead of time by the Lincoln office of the Weather Service on their phones as they were sitting in church. And they were efficiently moved to safe rooms in that church. And as the community was being blasted by this storm, you know, their lives were saved. There's a video that emerged from that storm, Ed, when one of the folks there saw the squall line coming in and was aware of the warning. So he went to the door of his home in this beautiful subdivision out there and photographed the shelf cloud coming in, the squall line coming in. He runs down to the basement, keeps the video running. You go into the darkness of the basement, and you hear the smashing and banging as the house comes apart upstairs. He then ascends the stairs and looks out what's left of the front door, and the whole neighborhood is gone. I mean, gone. And I put a stopwatch to it. It took 16 seconds for that tornado to take out that neighborhood. And 1,100 homes were destroyed, 3 people killed, 125 injured. God only knows what the death toll would have been had those warnings not gone out. And, you know, there are just there's case after case where local weather service offices have interacted with first responders, law enforcement officials, government officials at all levels of government to protect their residents against storms, to set up storm spotter networks. Here in Chicago, that heat wave disaster in July of 1995, which killed over 700 people. That's the worst and most deadly natural disaster that's occurred in this area. It was weather-related. And after it happened, the Daley administration sent out a call to the meteorological community and said, hey, let's work with you and see if there's some way that we can anticipate these heat waves. You know, the thing is, we knew the heat was coming, but we didn't know the point at which people died. So Paul Daley, who ended up working with me in the last 27 years when we were doing the Chicago Tribune weather page, was the meteorologist in charge of the Chicago office, and he went to work with Dr. John Wilhelm. And I'm sure you know these are names familiar to you, Edwin, having worked in government all these years. And they went through mortality and morbidity stats with great care and established exactly the conditions. You need 3 days with triple-digit heat indices and lots of sun, and you need 3 nights where the nighttime temp doesn't go below 80 degrees, and that's when you start seeing people dying in elevated numbers from heat. Mm-hmm. And when they went back and looked at every heat disaster, there'd been an increase in fatalities after each one of them. The point I'm driving home here is the importance of these local weather service offices interacting with their communities, talking in real time with law enforcement. You know, we have, 284 municipalities in and around the greater Chicago area, 8.3 million people here. Our weather service interacts with, at Romeoville, interacts with all these folks. They've laid out, when a storm comes in and they're tracking it on the Doppler radar, they know where every hospital, every school, every highway, every home is, and they know exactly the territory over which these storms are going. If you get to the point where you so degrade the National Weather Service that they go into regional centers, or God forbid they've got some private enterprise issuing the warnings from some distant location, you're not going to have the accuracy of the warnings that we have around here. And already, with the 1,000 people that have been cut with these DOGE budget cuts, 1,000 people cut in the National Weather Service. Do you know, Edwin, there are 4,200 people that man the National Weather Service, all the offices all over the country, all the way from Guam to the Atlantic, all the way from Alaska down to the Gulf. 4,200 people collect the weather data that's used by 330 million people in this country. Every weather report, every satellite image, every radar image, every weather observation and forecast have their origins with data that comes in from the National Weather Service. Mm-hmm. And with the 1,000 people they've cut, among them, we've lost weather balloon launches. Weather balloons are incredibly important to feed into the information from them into our computer models to get accurate forecasts. And we're not sure exactly how this is going to degrade the weather forecast model accuracy. It's not something we'll see on a day-to-day basis, but we're going to come across these extreme weather events, whether it be a tornado outbreak or a hurricane landfall, that are not as accurately predicted by these models because there's not proper data going into them. So, what's going on is really concerning in an agency that's been lean and mean and consistently ranked among the most respected federal agencies in our government. People respect the Weather Service. It's often the top-rated government federal agency because people understand its products and use them all the time. We've all heard blizzard warnings and tornado warnings and talked about flood levels, crest levels on rivers like the Des Plaines and Fox and the Kankakee River, the Rock River, all the rivers around here. It's just amazing how we put these data to work from our National Weather Service, and they're going after it. So with these budget cuts.
I guess I don't really understand. So the way it works, you're saying that National Weather Service has local operations around the country, and they have
122 local offices. 122 local offices. There are 160 Doppler radar sites. There's an entire satellite network that's operated by NOAA in conjunction with the military and NASA. But it's the Weather Service and NOAA that oversees the weather satellite operation. There is no private entity that can take over these functions. This is one of these humongous functions that's uniquely handled by the government, and it's been done very, very well by our National Weather Service.
Yeah, I mean, and 6.3 billion pieces of data over what period?
A day.
How long? A day.
A day. A day.
Wow.
You know what? When you go on your phone and you look at a radar, when you go on your phone and look at a satellite or pull down, so all that data, even though it may have been relayed to you by a private entity who has picked it up and is reselling it to you, all that data has originated with the National Weather Service. All of it. And so, you start fiddling with our National Weather Service, you are literally dealing with and degrading the collection of weather data that's produced a system in which weather forecasts have consistently gotten more accurate and has saved countless lives. I mean, look at the fires in Los Angeles recently. They were predicted a week ahead of time. You didn't allay the property damage, but you had all the emergency folks on standby. In Washington, that tornado I talked about in 2013, November of 2013, the Weather Service office had called the city of Washington, the mayor and all his lieutenants, and told them be on the standby because, 3 days from now, we're going to have a storm system in here that could be sending tornadoes and damaging winds through your area. And this goes on time and time again. The Weather Service alerts, agencies to be standing by, ready to react. Think about our aviation community. You want to fly in an airplane where the pilot doesn't know where the jet stream is and therefore where the turbulence is and the thunderstorms and all the aviation weather data. The defense of our country, the military uses these data. And it's absolutely crucial when you launch a rocket or a bomb, they've got to correct for the wind and everything else and have proper data on that. That's all collected by the Weather Service. So, it's a big deal.
And I assume they think that they can break it and then privatize it and make money off of it. But that means that weather data that's needed by everybody in America is going to be received by people who can pay for it, I guess.
Well, here's the thing. The magic word in the lexicon of these people cutting the budgets is privatize. You always, so they think, get a better product if you privatize everything. Well, the fact of the matter is that's not always true. In fact, if they try to privatize, they're not going to be able to privatize everything the Weather Service does. It'll still have to operate weather satellites and weather observation stations and buoys and all because nobody else can afford to do all that, and satellites. But what they'll do is the taxpayer has already paid money to collect these data, and so now there'll be a third party that's selling it to you and putting their charge on it. So you'll actually be paying twice for the weather data that we're now getting rather officially from the Weather Service. Now, we do buy data from private vendors, but they're going to have a monopolistic control over what they charge for this stuff if you take the Weather Service out of the picture. So the prices can be expected to escalate.
Yeah. I'm sort of stunned by the complexity of what we've built, that only 4,200 people can sort of manage it. But when you think that this includes buoys in rivers, whatever, I assume buoys that measure tides as well as currents, thousands of pieces of satellite data from balloons. I suppose there's also the individual sort of storm spotters who report in as well. And then you tell me that they tied all of this to a detailed sort of local knowledge of where are the schools, where are the churches, where, so that they can help use this data in ways that actually benefit people locally. That's not something anybody else can do. That's a government function.
I think a lot of people figure, if we break up the weather service, we'll have the Weather Channel do it, or some other private entity, Fox Weather, or something like that. Where do they think that information's coming from? You break up the weather. When they come on with tornado warnings from Atlanta, Georgia, from the Weather Channel, they're reading stuff that's coming out of our local office. And if our local office is disbanded or something like that, then that data is no longer going to the distant location that's feeding us these reports, and it certainly hurts our local meteorologists. My
Tom,
entire career, I picked.
Sorry, when you say our local office, you're talking about the local office of the National Weather Service, right?
That's correct. There are 122 such offices. The Weather Service operates a central center on the University of Maryland campus. It's called the NOAA Climate and Weather Center. It's there that meteorologists pull in all the computer data. They have two supercomputing facilities. One is in Orlando, Florida. Another one is in Phoenix, on opposite sides of the country. There's a reason for that. If something were to happen to the electrical grid in Orlando, then they would switch over to the facility on the other side of the country, which likely would still be operating and not be affected by whatever electrical outlet. The redundancy there is needed for security purposes. You can't have the weather system going down when you've got planes. We have 5,000 planes in the air every day, 5,000 flights. And these pilots need to know what's going on. I was telling you, a United Airlines pilot, when I was flying back from Hawaii recently, and he came back to my seat and he said, I saw you on the roster and I wanted to say hi. And I said, well, Captain, how nice to meet you. And I said, I'm doing some special projects with WGN. And I've always wanted to share with my listeners, my viewers, how it is you pilots brief yourself on where we're going to run into turbulence or thunderstorms. And, he says, let me show you something. He runs down the aisle to the cockpit, comes back with his laptop computer in his hand, and here's the whole route. He came up to me in Honolulu. We were flying back. My flight was going back to Chicago. So he had the whole route there on his laptop, with all of the upper winds indicating where the turbulence was going to be. There's a center out in Aurora, the FAA center, within which there's a National Weather Service unit that works with the air traffic controllers so that they can route the air traffic around dangerous weather situations. This goes on all the time. It's completely transparent to folks flying. You have no idea this is going on, but these pilots set altimeters in their cockpits that are based on current barometric pressures taken at the airports. That's why by the way, we have airport-based weather observations. People say, well, nobody lives at the airport. Yeah, but the pilots do, and they have a unique need for this information constantly. There are Doppler radars that have been put in to prevent these wind shear-related plane crashes at these airports. Mm-hmm. So it's a very complex enterprise, and what's interesting is there is a private meteorological industry that piggybacks with the Weather Service, and the Weather Service wants it that way because there are types of for instance, our ball teams here in town or the city of Chicago Streets and Sanitation, they contract with private folks so that if there's a rain delay at a ball game and all, they have somebody to call and give them a read on how likely it is that game's going to resume again. Or if the city is ready to dispatch its the snow plows, they want to know how much snow, when's it going to start, how long are they going to have to keep the trucks out there, how deep's it going to get, how are the winds going to be during it, and they have somebody to call. Well, the Weather Service couldn't handle individual requests like that. So private firms have grown up that offer that sort of very selective, very targeted weather information. And there are billions of dollars.
All based on the data that the other guys collect, right?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. The backbone is the Weather Service data. Yeah.
Wow. So I've gotten even more scared during this conversation, Tom, because now the cuts to the FAA and the cuts to the National Weather Service combine to make it even more frightening to get on a plane.
Do you know, among the people they laid off of the Weather Service are people related to Hurricane Hunter? We're approaching hurricane season on the coast. They let people go who work with some of the people work in the Hurricane Hunter aircraft. They've let technicians go who know how to fix these Doppler radars. I mean, this what this equipment we work with in our daily lives is all about. We need somebody who knows how to fix this stuff when it goes wrong on us. When our automobiles go down, we go to a car mechanic who has an expertise none of us have to fix our car. So the same is true in the Weather Service. They've let technicians go. They've let frontline meteorologists. I was talking to a friend of mine who works at their modeling center. This is where they develop the computer models that forecast the weather, which have revolutionized weather forecasting. They let 10 of them go. They just, sometimes these people are let go with 15 minutes advance notice, and their supervisors don't even know that they're being let go. Nobody has described, the process is so non-transparent that nobody has told anybody what criteria they're using for deciding who they're letting go or why. These people are sent a cold form in an email before they shut off their email access and told that your services are no longer needed because you haven't performed up to standards, when in fact that's incredibly cruel and unfair. Yeah, one of my best friends is Louis Uccellini, who's recently retired head of the Weather Service. Louis was working on his doctorate while he's up at the University of Wisconsin, and he looks at what's going on. He said it's cruel. What we're letting go, we're letting a lot of young people that will be the forecasters of tomorrow and are just starting on their careers. They're among the first to go. So who's going to replace these folks when they retire? God only knows, because and there are young people in schools studying meteorology. That's not an easy degree to get. And they're wondering what their job prospects are going to be. And it's not because the Weather Service hasn't done its job properly. It's because somebody's decided the government is uniformly across the board bloated, and therefore they're going to take a meat axe to the career. And another thing, too, and you and I both know this, a lot of this is to muzzle climate science. This Project 2025 was written. They had intentions all along, with the blessing of the fossil fuel industry, to get rid of, any scientific agency funded by the government that's measuring what's going on with our climate. Mm-hmm. So, and this is exactly, they want to take NOAA apart, because they figure, if they aren't taking readings, then none of us will know whether, what's going on with the climate. They want to shut this information down. And what's going to be lost in the process is day-to-day weather forecasting and warning. So this is, it's important, I think, and I appreciate the chance to talk to you about this, Edwin, because I think it's important the public know what's going on.
Well, and no one knows this like you do. I don't think anybody certainly in the administration could tell how much data or how many offices or the relationship that these people have with their local governments around the country. This is incredibly important, Tom.
It is. You think Elon Musk understands where a weather forecast? He may launch rockets and all, or at least have smart people who know how to do it for him. But
the last one blew up.
You think he understands the workings of the National Weather Service? There are things our government does that are complex, and they take on big tasks, and they're uniquely equipped to do it because you need an organization with scale to it. And also, by the way, we depend on the weather observers for observations from all over the world. To make a forecast for Chicago, we've got to know what's going on the other side of the planet, because buckles in the jet stream over there and all affect immediately what's going on over here on this side of the planet. So most of these models we run are global in nature, and the Weather Service, working through the World Meteorological Organization of the United Nations, coordinates the exchange of weather information among countries. So that's another function that's performed by the Weather Service.
Well, so we've talked about the impact it's going to have on lots of lives. I guess it's also going to have an impact on our food supply, because it's really important for agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, there's a growing sensitivity to drought and extremes of rainfall, both of which are occurring with increasing frequency as our planet warms. A warmer atmosphere can hold more water, and therefore where it decides to rain, you get more rain. Our hurricanes are wetter, they're slower moving, they're increasing in intensity faster because the oceans have warmed as the air above it warms. And so there's a lot of stuff going on. And if you just look at the sheer number of billion-dollar disasters, can you imagine what the price tag is going to be in Los Angeles to rebuild what was, burned in a matter of hours, several weeks ago? It just boggles the mind. Look at our flood here in July of 1996. A year after we lost all those people in a heat wave, we had a record-breaking Illinois flood that dropped 17 inches of rain in hour after hour of thunderstorms. The price tag on that at the time was $750 million. Who knows what it would be now? And somebody's got to pay for this stuff. And the data set that is collected by the Weather Service, that's another of their functions, to collect these data. When you start figuring out how you're going to adjust to where you're building buildings and cities and municipalities and where you're rebuilding storm-damaged buildings, you want to know something about the history of the weather in that area so that you can intelligently go about where you're going to rebuild. This all comes from, data collected by the National Centers for Environmental Information. NCEI is its acronym. It's based in Asheville, North Carolina. It archives all of the country's weather data, and it's available to anybody. Any of us as U.S. citizens can get it. We pay, as an individual taxpayer, about the cost of about a Big Mac for the weather information we get over the course of a year, about $4. That's what the Weather Service costs us. And that's pretty much a bargain. When you turn on the radio and you hear it's 35 at O'Hare, that reading has come from a government sensor. And by the way, they've automated a lot of that to save costs so that they won't become bloated. There are machines now that do that, and that replaced some human observers. So it's not like the Weather Service hasn't tried to remain efficient through it all.
I can't think of anything just sitting here, I'm thinking about all the things this touches. And I just can't think of anything it doesn't. I mean, imagine trying to build a high-rise in a big city and not knowing anything about wind.
How about a nuclear power plant, which, there's talk about starting to, or any power plant? Years ago when Ted Fujita was at the tornado researcher, was at the University of Chicago, he was, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission came to him on siting of power plants because they wanted to know what the strongest wind that could occur in an area was. So they built a power plant that wouldn't be ruptured by a tornado going over it or a severe thunderstorm. If you're building on a coastline, like in Florida, a vulnerable coastline with sea levels rising, and they are, you want to know, first of all, how fast they're rising, but secondly, what's the flood history of that area? And we certainly found out about that in the Appalachians with the recent floods and extreme rains there. And we're finding out in Los Angeles about the wildfire vulnerability from what's gone on out there. And these fires that year in and year out now are burning with increased fervor out in the Rocky Mountains, all through the country. The other day, when we had tornadoes dancing around here, we had smoke in the air from 150 fires that had burned in Oklahoma alone. We had dust that was blown up here from Texas. So there were fires burning across the Plains states. Didn't get a lot of coverage, but here. But these affected ranchers and all kinds of folks down in that area, and they ultimately did us too because the smoke came up here.
Well, boy, Tom, this sure doesn't sound like the time that we ought to be breaking the National Weather Service.
No, it doesn't. And Edwin, you know what? If you use the right term there, breaking. You knock Humpty Dumpty off the wall. You might be able to put them back together in some form, but you're going to lose expertise. We're losing young people that will be the future of this science. I mean, one of the great things about this country has been the scientific expertise, which has put us light years ahead of other countries. But this is a competitive world these days. There was an article in the Washington Post the other day about how these European universities are eyeing our scientists because since they're being so disrespected over here by our administration, they're going to try and attract some of these folks over there.
Tom,
the expertise
we got like 2 minutes left. I'm so grateful for your time and your talent. I just want to, I know you have spent a lifetime not being a partisan in politics. This is not, that's not your world. You have been focused on the data and doing stuff. But this moment has brought you into a fight for all of our future. And I'm grateful that you're doing it. And I can't wait to see this thing that you're producing that talks about this. This TV.
It's going to air on Tuesday night. Tuesday night, 9 o'clock news on WGN, Edwin. And, we've been working on it. We want to show you some of the communities that have been affected by these accurate weather forecasts, the lives that have been saved. We talked to some of the people in that church that were sitting there that day when that tornado came into Washington, Illinois. And look what, we've had our own tornadoes. Oak Lawn, Belvedere, Plainfield. Our northwest suburbs at 11 o'clock at night. Boy, when you got the lightning flashing at 11 o'clock at night, you want somebody on duty monitoring radar, which is the one way you can see these storms clearly at night, telling you where they're going and who's at risk. And that's what our weather service does.
Tom, thank you, as always. It's a really honor to talk to you, and my listeners learn so much. I'm grateful.
Edwin, it's always fun to talk to you. And you say hi to your wife, my former news director, Jennifer Schulze, and it's always fun talking to you, Edwin. You take care.
Take care, Tom.